Well, let's talk to Frank Smyth, who's the founder of Global Journalist Security and is also a veteran press freedom advocate. He joins us live from Leesburg in Virginia. Thank you so much, Frank, for joining us. Now, how does this compare for you since the records began of journalists being killed?
This is the absolute worst conflict for journalists we have ever seen. More journalists have been killed over the past year, just in the past year, in Gaza than we've ever seen anywhere else. And the overwhelming majority of those journalists are Gazan journalists reporting on their own communities. There is evidence of direct targeting that we saw in southern Lebanon, which is still under investigation, targeting Reuters journalists, AFP journalists, and others. And there's also evidence that many of the journalists have been killed in indiscriminate bombing attacks that have taken a great toll on the Gazan population and a great toll upon journalists. We've also now seen the accusations from the Israeli Defense Forces accusing 6 Al Jazeera journalists of being agents of Hamas or Islamic Jihad. But there is actually no evidence that they are presenting. They're creating a post on X that purports to talk about evidence, but it doesn't actually prove anything. So if the Israeli Defense Forces want to continue, they're going to have to show evidence to make these connections, because now it seems like they're continuing to shoot the messenger, blaming journalists for the reporting that is showing the reality on the ground, which is evidence of war crimes, if not acts of genocide or genocide.
And of course, just in response to those Israeli accusations, Al Jazeera maintains and has maintained throughout this that those accusations are baseless. And as of course, we know that Al Jazeera has effectively been banned from reporting within Israel and within the occupied territories, a story that Al Jazeera has been very much across for decades. Now, it's important to also not just talk about those deaths. Some of those journalists, as we said there, for example, Samer Abu Dakka, I had met him personally back in Gaza in February. Those are not just journalists, they were also family members, people of the community where everyone in Gaza knows each other. But I also want to talk about the journalists that are not being allowed to cover what's going on in the Gaza Strip. Of course, some have been allowed in by the Israeli forces and by the government, but it's very selective. How important is it, Frank, to allow journalists to go into the Gaza Strip and be able to report on the facts on the ground?
Journalists are the only independent monitors that are available to document what is happening on the ground, no matter who is committing abuses or no matter what kind of atrocities are occurring or other activities. And without journalists, you create a hermetic environment where you can do anything you want without any measure of accountability. Every democratic nation, all the nations that are part of the international community of nations, purport to uphold press freedom. That means allowing access for journalists, not just Al Jazeera journalists who live there, but journalists from outside to report on the ground and report on the ground without minders. Minders accompanying journalists are what you would expect from China or Russia or other authoritarian states. Israel purports to be a democracy that adheres to democratic values. And their treatment of journalists is inconsistent with.
And of course, you have Israeli ministers that are far-right ministers, such as Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister in the government at the time when a lot of us were covering the war, that were putting out a narrative which the Israeli public believed, targeting journalists that looked like they could be Palestinian origin, and they were targeting them. It was vigilante style. Now, just wanted to unpick something here where RSF is saying that they are actually have complained about this with the ICC prosecutor Karim Khan, who has assured them that crimes against journalists are included in its investigation. Now, what can be done? Because there does seem to be apathy when it comes to the number of journalists killed. Is it because a lot of them are Palestinian? Is it because of where they are from?
I think, unfortunately, the fact that the overwhelming majority of journalists killed in Gaza have been Palestinians means it's not getting the attention that it would get if these journalists were all working for Western media or media outside of the theater. And that's a terrible thing to say, but I believe that is the case. And we have to treat Palestinian journalists as being as important as any journalists, right? You cannot target them. You must allow them access. And I think this conflict requires a media presence to report what is happening on the ground and document what is happening. And it seems that there's a campaign to target journalists and to limit their access so there will be no witnesses to what is occurring. And that is not democracy, and that is not how the international community purports to operate.
And of course, though, there is also social media, which has allowed many people globally to find out what's going on. Frank Smyth, the founder of Global Journalist Security, thank you so much. And as we know, they always say a democracy is measured by the amount of press freedom that it gives. Thank you for joining us live there from Virginia.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.